Well, folks, it's time for the penultimate character discussion for the Trigun Retrospective. And this one will be on Millions Knives, and Legato Blue Summers, and kind of in passing the Gung Ho Guns. Now, this may seem like a bit too much for one video, though I shall explain my reasoning for this format here. Well, the Trigun anime is a classic. Its greatest weakness in my eyes is how rushed it is near the end, and how this impacts villain development. Villains are characters too, after all, and since Trigun is a character story, it would only make sense that you would want your villains developed as much as the main character. Well, not as much, but, as much as any supporting character. All of the villain characters, however, due to the rushed format and lack of screen time, are not as developed as they could be, and this again is a great weakness of the series. And since both of these two main antagonists and the Gung Ho Guns are rushed, I decided it would be best to focus on both of them in the same episode and explain how this rushing negatively impacts their characters. Now, of course, we will look at both of their characters. However, I will say that in-depth analysis for both of them is a little complicated due to the fact they feel a bit incomplete. Now, when I say incomplete, I do not mean they are written incomplete, as incomplete people searching for answers or character development, but that the pacing of this ending and that the pacing of the show and their screen time made it so that their full character, the full source material, could not be conveyed to the audience. All of these characters suffer from this lack of development, and while it is kind of excusable for the villain of the week, Gung Ho Guns, it is much more detrimental to the two main antagonists of the series. Knive's character, while given a bit of backstory, lacks much character other than misanthrope, and Legato, while given a definite character, lacks a backstory to explain it and to tie it together. These two feel incomplete, as neither have both a fleshed out backstory and a deep character. We know some of Knive's past, and that he hates humans, but his lack of screen time means he can't really convey much else to the viewer. We know Legato is a very cold and dreary man, and he oozes his own air and character, but a lack of backstory means we cannot figure out why he has that air, and this makes the viewer more dismissive of him. To start, there are the issues with Knives. To look at these, let's see what Knives stands for and does first though. Knives is hinted at from episode 12, though it does not see any screen time until the flashback episode of 17. In this episode, it is shown that he hates humanity, and is responsible for stranding it upon Gunsmoke. This is all after a botched attempt to kill all of the colonists. After this, though, Knives does not appear as an adult until around episode 24. In various flashbacks from 24 to 26, it is revealed that he's explored the planet a bit with Vash after they crash landed, although Vash later abandoned him. It is also shown that he is responsible for causing Vash to accidentally destroy the city of July, and that he holds plants to be superior life forms. Butterflies, if you will. He gives the Gung Ho Guns instructions via Legato and is known to hate Vash, although this is about as far as it goes. Finally, in an episode 26, Knives is subdued, but not killed by Vash, and his fate is left vague as Vash carries him back to town. It is implied Vash will redeem him, although Knives' lack of screen time leaves it truly dubious to the viewer whether or not they believe he can actually be redeemed. His lack of screen time inhibits our ability to believe in a possible redemption arc. As for his character, all the viewer is told and can imply is that Knives hates Vash out of a misguided sense of pragmatism and narcissism. He sees emotion as somewhat pointless and thus gets straight to the point of fixing the world by purging it of spiders. The problem is that he considers all of humanity to be spiders, and that he has no real moral compass to temper this. Why he is this way is sort of explained. He is standoffish by nature and was beaten from time to time in the past, but it still feels like more is needed to fully flesh him out. When rewatching Trigun, I understood that this guy was the big bad, that this guy was serious, that this guy was strong, but also that this guy didn't really feel like a real guy. And this is more due to a lack of screen time. While Knives is serviceable as a main antagonist, he feels more like a force than a character. And in a series whose strongest strength is its characters, Knives feels like the odd one out. There's nothing wrong per se with his character, it's just that what's given isn't quite enough. This is further highlighted by the fact that Knives is not really mentioned that much. It is possible to have a big bad lurking in the corner if his underlings and the main protagonist hype him up enough. It's possible to do it well if sufficient mention of him is made and his screen time is strong enough to convey who he truly is. However, with Knives, all his evil is concentrated in a few episodes, and most of the acts are actually carried out by the Gung Ho Guns and Legato Blue Summers. On the topic of Mr. Blue Summers, Legato first appears in episode 12. and is the point of contact between Knives and the gung-ho guns. In this role, he assigns them with the task of killing Vash and generally bringing doom upon Gunsmoke. While Legato appears periodically to spout his nihilistic views and commit some evil, he does not intervene much until the gung-ho guns are whittled down to just Mr. Mid-Valley, the Horn Freak. It is in episode 24, I believe, and it is in this episode that his greatest impact is made. This is when he forces Vash to kill him. He does this because he knows how sacred life is to Vash, and that forcing Vash to kill anyone will break him mentally. Legato succeeds in this too, by forcing Vash to choose between the lives of Meryl and Millie, and his own, that is Legato's. In this way, Legato actually, potentially, has a massive impact on both Vash and the series. Now I say potentially because, again, the rush pacing kind of botches this. As in episode 25, the next one, Vash gets over his mental collapse after hearing an appeal by Meryl. While this arc is sound in theory, the arc of Vash being forced to kill and Meryl slowly but surely lifting him out of his gloom in preparation for the final fight, it is botched by a lack of pacing. For this to have the greatest impact, it would have to have taken more than one episode. And while it still works, it is definitely something that feels a bit fast-paced, a bit rushed, and this definitely diminishes Legato's impact. Limiting Legato's impact also limits his character, as it forces the viewer to focus on it more. And since Legato's character also suffers from a lack of development, in this case a lack of backstory, his character as a whole feels incomplete. But what is this character? His character is a very distinct one who loathes the world and its people, and life itself. He is a cynic in the extreme, and seems to borderline worship death. This creates a man who seeks to destroy life not out of wrath or some misguided passion, but out of an urge to simply get it over with. He sees life itself as a waste of time. While cold and impassionate, he is also intelligent, however, and knows how and when to conduct himself, and in what ways. He even figures the best way to break Vash, that is, mentally. He is also, dare I say, honest. He is true to his views and puts the same importance on his life as any others, that being none at all. While all these traits coagulate to create a distinct character, the lack of a unifying context hampers the audience's ability to relate to him. This lack of a backstory makes his character seem to fall a bit flat. While Knives' character is limited by a lack of screen time, Legato's is limited by a lack of backstory. To start, this lack of a backstory causes some logistical issues, as viewers will be prone to ask practical questions, like why does this guy follow Knives? How does he know him? Etc. However, more importantly, the lack of a backstory impacts his characterization. When Legato showed up for the first time, I understood that this guy is powerful, this guy is up to no good, and this guy feels like a real guy. He clearly has strong personal views and is very driven. He's clearly motivated and knows who he is. But we are never told why. And as a viewer, I understand that what Legato is about, and what he wants, and even kind of how he feels. But such strong emotions on Legato's part are not given context to justify them. As such, I cannot fully understand the why behind his feelings and views, and this in turn diminishes them. It is clear how he feels, but if a viewer has to ask why does he feel this, the next question in line for the viewer is why should I care about this? It makes his character much less relatable, as it weakens the connection to the character. This is ironic considering that in the manga, Legato's backstory actually makes him quite relatable, as in the manga it is revealed his extremely cynical nature is born out of an extremely unpleasant life. Since this backstory is not provided, however, a lot of relatability for Legato is not provided. And this is important, as if Legato's character is relatable, it means that Legato's character has a better place in the world of Gunsmoke, and it means that the viewer is more likely to go along with his motivations. If Legato's character is unrelatable or unexplained, however, the viewer may start to question his presence more. They may start to question, why is this guy here? It feels more forced, and it feels as though his views are more generic or tacky. They do not feel as personable or justified. Regardless of justification, however, there are a few morals that can be learned from the character arcs, or lack therefore of both Knives and Legato. They do serve as good foils to the character of Vash, as they both serve to be direct opposites of what he stands for. Knives is a misanthrope who completely disvalues life, while Vash holds life as completely sacred. Legato is someone who believes in the incredibly cynic nature of life and always sees things half empty, while Vash believes that there is always a chance for redemption and tends to be extremely optimistic. Thus, even though their characters are not fully fleshed out, they do serve as good counterpoints to the main character of Vash the Stampede. Knives' arc, or lack therefore of again, also shows the failures of the misanthropic view. He tries to do everything by himself, and as a result has no one really there to support him, other than those he
gets to go with him by force, and those slowly get picked away, and since he sees no value on them, it's only too late when he realizes he is alone. Although this does not bother him emotionally or mentally, it does mean that he is at a disadvantage when having to fight Vash, as since his minions failed to stop Vash, they must now go one-on-one, and in that fight, Vash ultimately wins. It shows that the idea of isolation and seeking to do everything by oneself, that it never really gets anything done. It also shows that there is a value to community and that there is a value to teamwork, something which Vash has emphasized throughout the entire series. On the theories of Legato's theories, while Legato does succeed in his short-term goal of breaking Vash, he fails in his long-term goal of disabling Vash permanently, and this shows the short-sighted nature of the cynical school of thought he follows. His school of thought is inherently self-destructive, and as a result, while it can accomplish some short-term goals, the cost at which these goals are accomplished is so high that it cannot maintain success. This is seen in the fact that Vash rebounds from being mentally broken by Legato. Legato has failed in his long-term goal of breaking Vash and taking him out for good. His inherently self-destructive philosophy has failed to achieve anything concrete or long-term, while Vash's optimistic philosophy has allowed him to rebound from something which would otherwise devastate someone with a more pessimistic worldview. It is proven that Vash's optimism, or at least his ability to rebound in his own inner strength, is something which is more inherently valuable than the inherent cynicism that Legato possesses. And while Legato's cynicism is justified, according to his backstory, which is left out of the anime, it also shows that it is somewhat short-sighted, or at the very least that it cannot achieve long-term results, and it shows the inherently self-destructive nature of such steep cynicism, and it shows that such steep cynicism doesn't result in anything good or even productive for those who follow it. So even though these two characters are not fully fleshed out, they do represent good axioms to go against. They do represent things that Vash stands against, and why you should stand against him as well. They represent the failures of their own both selfish and later cynical ideologies. Once again, Knives fails because he is too selfish. He seeks everything for himself, and in the end gets taken out by someone who trusts everyone around him. Legato, on the other hand, is so carried away by his views that everything is meaningless that he can't achieve any meaningful results. Even though his short-term result is achieved, he doesn't really achieve anything in the long run. Thus, Vash disproves both the views of these characters. Even though their own characters are not completely fleshed out, they have still served a very important purpose of justifying Vash's philosophy and disproving their own.
And this finally brings us to how the manga handles both of these characters and the gung-ho guns. While I mentioned I would not make much mention of the manga in this series, I feel that I have to here simply to say that these characters are fleshed out more in other media forms, and that the flaw lies in the anime's production/rushed pacing and not the source material itself. In the case of Knives, manga Knives dies and actually ends up actively helping Vash with his last act. This is a more complete arc than just incapacitated to be redeemed later. In the case of manga Legato, his extremely hard/disturbing backstory make it understandable as to why he has the views he does. It helps the audience relate to him a lot more than simply not explaining his views. In the case of the gung-ho guns, many of them go from serviceable villain of the week characters to secondary characters with unique motivations and goals. Some of them are even relatable to an extent. All of this is not to say I dislike any of these characters. No, both Legato and Knives are, as mentioned earlier, serviceable. It's just to say that I feel they are both victims of the rushed pacing of the anime, and that it would be unfair not to talk about this. It would be unfair to say this anime doesn't have any flaws, and this is definitely its strongest flaw. I feel that they are both decent characters, although I simply lament there wasn't more time to make them truly outstanding characters. Sure, Knives has an end goal and ideology, but we don't really see enough of him to really get to know who he is. Sure, Legato is a very memorable character, and we may kind of get to know who he is, but since we aren't told why he is the way he is, we can't fully come to get to know him. In fact, some might not even like his character, as it might feel a bit forced. We might not bother to care about his character as much. Both these characters are memorable. However, we might not be bothered to care about that memory as much. None of this is helped by the fact that Trigun at its core is a character story. And after all, what's a character story without fully fleshed out characters?